And now let's get to my interview with Peter Joseph, creator of the Zeitgeist Movement, which is also has a lot to do with this in the sense that the Zeitgeist Movement is trying to move past an era of greed and overconsumption into one of sustainability. And I'm just going to read to you this. This is their definition of the Zeitgeist Movement. The Zeitgeist Movement is a global sustainability activist group working to bring the world together for a common goal of species sustainability before it's too late. It's a social movement, not a political one, with over 1,100 chapters across nearly all countries. Divisive notions such as nations, governments, races, political parties, religions, creeds, or class are non-operational distinctions in the view of the movement. Rather, we recognize the world as one system and the human species as a singular unit, sharing a common habitat. Our overarching intent could be summarized as the application of the scientific method for social concern. And if you haven't heard of the Zeitgeist movies, just listen to the interview and then go check out the movies. They're pretty fucking amazing. He's put out, his name's Peter Joseph again, and he's put out 3 movies. The first one, I think you'll hear in the interview, he had no idea it was going to go as big as it did. You know, now these movies are viewed by 50,000 people a day and continue. You know, they've millions and millions of hits. And the movies have really touched on something that I think people knew in their soul, in a way. And so these movies have led to an overarching movement. They've just touched so many people, and people wanted to get active and wanted to say, yeah, we're living in an unsustainable model, and clearly we have to do something about it. We have to unite and do something about it. And so I think these very much connect to the Occupy Wall Street, the Occupy Together movements. I don't think Zeitgeist is that far off. Sure, if you want to get into the nit and gritty, they might be. There would be disagreements between the Zeitgeist Movement and various protesters and various people that agree with Occupy Wall Street, but the overarching idea that we are in a model that can't continue because we're sucking the fucking life out of this country. And, you know, like I said on BBC Radio the other day, that this is like basically we're living in a bank that is on fire, and Wall Street and the top 1%, rather than putting out the fire, which they are capable of because they started it, rather than putting it out, they're working on how much money can they steal from the burning bank. How much money can they fit into their pockets and stuff down their shirts before the building collapses. That's what's going on right now. That's what we're seeing. You know, on the Titanic, these are the people that were raiding the safes as the ship was sinking, rather than helping people get on the lifeboats or whatnot. Anyway, so Peter Joseph made these movies. He started an amazing movement, and I was lucky enough to perform at the Zeitgeist Media Festival, his first media festival in Los Angeles, and it was amazing. I think there is like a good video of it that's going to come out fairly soon. He's been working on, and it was amazing to perform at that festival, along with amazing bands and wonderful speakers, and the Lost Children of Babylon, the rap group, the band Hero Sonic, and just really the comedian Rick Overton was there. Just really great people. Really, and Banksy. There were Banksy works of art upstairs. It was just an amazing event to be a part of, and I was thrilled to be a part of it, and hopefully there'll be video of that soon enough. But anyway, let's see. I think that about covers it. Enjoy the interview with Peter Joseph, and just before I start that, please donate what you think this episode was worth. I'm trying to keep the lights on here at Moment of Clarity, especially now that it's growing, now that I'm trying to put out more content, put out more longer podcasts for you guys. And it'd be great if you could donate whatever you feel this episode is worth at leecamp.com. leecamp.net. If you could just do that, that would really help keep this thing going. Also, I'm at twitter.com/leecamp, facebook.com/leecamp. And just keep in touch. Tell people to check out Moment of Clarity if you get a chance. Share it on your Facebook wall if you like one of the videos. That would really help a lot. And without further ado, Peter Joseph. I know about y'all and what you believe. I believe this right now, right here. I was wondering. I didn't realize this until I saw the interview you had sent me. But you used to be in Wall Street and advertising and stuff. And I think you said, and you're clearly hoping people will have a revolution of thought. How did yours come about? Because that's a big turnaround, it sounds like.
Good question. Originally I was a musician, but being a musician in New York City, a percussionist as I were, I struggled to try to get work, and I wasn't really fitting into the classical world as everyone else was. So I just expanded out with whatever would pay me, and I got into advertising first. And worked in this, boutique advertising agencies doing music composition, video editing for a number of years. And at that point, I got so frustrated with it. And I always had an understanding of what advertising was. I mean, I did it, I submitted to it, and I tried to get into it. I tried to believe this was the system. But there was always a cognitive dissonance there, so I can clarify that a little bit.
Right.
And then the Wall Street thing, I got into private equity trading. I did years and years of study on basically just being a trader from home. I thought to myself, okay, I got to get out of the system. What can I do where I don't have a boss? What can I do where I don't have to submit to somebody? And the only real occupation out there, which again contributes nothing, is equity trading.
And stand-up comedy.
Yeah, sort of, but you still have to rely on people coming to see you.
True.
Equity trading is completely independent. You just have to, gauge the market.
Right.
But, so I did all that stuff, and before I had my awakening, if you will, which was, a social awakening of realizing you have to really think in a conscientious way about society, or else you're just going to suffer in the end, especially now more than ever. Originally, I was going to just be an equity trader and travel the world and live in my own little self-contained environment, ignore all the problems. And
Right.
it just slowly dawned on me, you can't be that way. It's going to come back to haunt all of us. And as I started to pay attention to world events, and again, 9/11 was a big thing. Whatever you think of that event, after you think about this shit happening and what it means on multiple levels, something has to give with the way the world is operating. And that's a rough kind of outline of my awakening. But yeah.
You actually got to my second question, which was going to be in the first movie. I mean, it seems like the Zeitgeist, the movies deal with some very broad issues. And the first movie begins with religion, and it's asking for a revolution of thought on very broad issues. And I was going to say that 9/11 actually seems almost small compared to the other issues you deal with, and so I was going to ask you why that became such a centerpiece, considering compared to the other issues, it's not that big.
We got to remember that first film was, believe it or not, the first film was actually a performance piece. And you saw my opening at the Zeitgeist Media Festival. That was actually original music and score and performance that was taken from that first film, because I did it live in downtown Manhattan. That wasn't actually supposed to be a movie. The 9/11 section, well, compared to what the movement protocols are and what we talk about with the movement, it's obviously minuscule. I think the real controversy was really publicly generated, because at that point in time, there were only a few documentaries or a few media institutions or whatever actually engaging that subject. And that sort of became, that in the religion section of the first film sort of became the claim to fame and the ultimate controversy. And even today, it overshadows really in a lot of ways a lot of the more important economic issues, social issues, cultural issues that I really focus on. But that's sort of the nature of the public media. The easiest railroad for me when I go on television interviews or such is they just want to bring up religion or 9/11 as though that's all I ever talk about, and that's years in the past. I don't even engage those subjects anymore. Right. So it's an echo.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. What was the response to that first movie, by the way? Or what did you think it would be? When you put it online, did you think it was going to go like this?
No. Well, again, it was a performance piece. It was a
Right.
catharsis. I was working in advertising and doing all this Wall Street stuff, trying to get out of the system in my own selfish way. And I was like, all right, I want to do something, though, in the midst of this awakening, because I've always been fascinated by religion, always been fascinated by political events, usually within the kind of limits of debate spectrum, you know what I mean? Because people limit themselves into these frameworks that society has imposed upon them, Republican, Democrat, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't think beyond it. And that's really what the intention was of the first film. So after I performed it, I didn't even think about it. I uploaded it. I didn't have any clearance to anything, by the way. I mean, I had lawsuits threatened out the wazoo because when I uploaded this thing to Google Video in 2007, it wasn't intended to be anything. I certainly wasn't going to make a DVD out of it. I certainly wasn't going to have any kind of larger distribution. But since it just blew up and went viral almost immediately with, initially like 3 million views a month, and then it hit about 50 million views within 6 months, if I remember correctly, before Google canceled all their counters, which was quite mysterious.
Right.
And it was sitting there at the top of Google Video forever and ever. And you want to know something really funny? It happened, that movie was released not exactly, but right around the time Google Zeitgeist came out with their little political thing, where they had Bill Clinton and all these people coming to these conferences. And I completely overrode Google Zeitgeist in the search engines, which, again, magnified the traffic, too. I mean, Zeitgeist is completely associated with me now. It's Google Zeitgeist is secondary, which is really funny considering their marketing power.
Right.
But it's also a reflection of the time. There's a massive revolution happening on many different levels right now, and you and I are both very much integral to this, and it's fascinating. But anyway, back to the first film. It was really an experiment, and it was out of my control. I didn't expect to do any of this.
Yeah, it just kind of ran wild.
Yeah, it did.
I mean, obviously, you tapped into something that people, they haven't kind of been able to admit to themselves was there. I think is a lot of it. It's open doors that they have wanted to keep shut and didn't know they were capable of opening, I think.
I agree. A lot of the initial responses I got, and I still get, was in emails. They say, "Well, your movie made me feel normal. These are the things that I'd always thought about, but I felt alienated or I felt insane, and your movie made me feel sane." And that's a pretty interesting comment.
You also talk about the inherent flaws of money in the financial system, and I mean, maybe this isn't that far removed from a lot of the stuff that's covered in the movies, but I don't see a lot of talk about how maybe we've created a generation or a series of generations that has become more and more centered on greed. And is that, do you feel that's true, and do you feel that's a huge obstacle in this change of thought?
I kind of go a little broader because people assume that the greed mechanism is an anomaly of this system. My view is that greed is the system, and it doesn't matter whether it's the greed of $300 million a year hedge fund managers or the greed of, your general run-of-the-mill 9-to-5 corporate shill who's trying to work his way up the ladder to get that managerial position and all the little perks that come along with that. This system fuels it. Greed is the divine impulse of what the market system, essentially needs to keep going. And this is really admitted by all the major individuals like Milton Friedman, but they put it into a different context. They assume that this is a part of our nature, and it really isn't. And that's historically proven by many different other cultures and, societies that have existed through history that we conveniently ignore, that function in very egalitarian ways. But no, I completely agree with you. It's more maximized now than ever, because of for a few different reasons. There's the deprivation element. We have a more deprived society, a more imbalanced society, to be more specific. The wealth gap is massive.
Right.
And people, instead of seeing the structural problem, or in fact the psychologically reinforced problem, they assume that they're just supposed to try harder. What did Obama say when he came out a little while back about the economy? He's like, we have to compete harder.
Right.
And that's really the opposite of what really needs to happen here. The free market, as it were, whatever you want to call it, is fueling everything we're seeing around us, but we're throwing, water on an oil fire, assuming that it's going to actually do something, creating more money to resolve the problem of money. I can go on big tangents about that, but I don't want to do that. To answer your question, the structural and psychological reinforcements of this system perpetuate this greed mentality. And since the public has been brainwashed to assume that becoming rich and famous and having tons of property is the definition of success, they are automatically reinforcing everything that, in effect, oppresses them in the end. Because there's no way within the, quote, American dream, everyone can have everything and the big mansion and everything else. You have to have deprivation and scarcity to benefit the upper 1%. That's just the way the system has been set up.
Right, right. You also said the economic, in an interview I watched, you said the economic system has an outdated and false assumption of human conduct. Can you discuss that a little more?
Well, that goes back to the kind of socially Darwinistic view that people have. You go back to Milton Friedman and the Chicago School. To assume that people are inherently competitive. I mean, people are basically... Modern sociological advancements have found, like people like Robert Sapolsky and a lot of these very intelligent anthropologists that have come forward recently, using the scientific method to evaluate human behavior, as opposed to the superstitious views which are dominant today. It's been found that humans are basically a product of whatever the society will reinforce. I mean, we have some dark R-complex stuff, the lower reptilian brain, and fight or flight, all that stuff. If you deprive anybody, they will turn in ways that would seem unethical or would seem, as though they're bad people or whatever rhetoric you want to call it, quote, criminal. But the psychology scientifically is that if you impose on people and you give them an environment that requires certain things for their survival, they will adapt to it. And the humans are much more adaptive than anything culturally. Our brains haven't changed that much in thousands and thousands of years, yet our behaviors have changed dramatically. I mean, you go back to a couple hundred years ago, we were in Mexico, they were doing sacrifices, ripping people's hearts out and showing it to them and then eating them, and this was normality for the cultures back then. There's so many different variances that to assume that our human conduct requires the capitalist system, to assume we have to be competitive, these are all false assumptions. They have to be, because the flexibility is there. The real reality is that human nature, if you will, is the kind of the reality that there is no direct human nature at any fixed state. To assume that there's natural human nature, every single human would have to share the exact same approach exact same reaction to every situation. That just simply isn't the case. It's the victimization of culture that creates our reactions. So going back to early hunter-gatherer societies, going back to the... I can't remember their names right now, but these early societies that worked in egalitarian ways, the First Nations people that didn't have the imposition of the market system where the need for consumption and competition wasn't reinforced, they behaved very, 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 very differently. In fact, 99% of human culture has been egalitarian and non-competitive. We didn't have things like massive wars like we do now in history. These are products of our kind of, unfortunate evolution of this competitive model that we've continued to assume. It's tribalistic mentalities. It's outdated because it's tribal. It's assumed that there's not enough to go around, and that's really where the false notion comes from. And with the advent of technology and everything that's been happening, unbelievable levels of efficiency are now possible that could statistically provide for everybody on this planet with a very, very, very profound level of material abundance. But we're stopping that because of these old, outdated notions of what we think the human is and must require. And I could just kind of leave it at that.
And back to what you were saying about war, I feel like our brains have not, the empathy part of our brains have not evolved to the way we wage war now. Because I feel like, any of us, the most quote-unquote evil of us, would, if you see someone dying in front of you, you're generally going to help. But dropping bombs from drone aircrafts that are being piloted in Las Vegas on grainy video, that empathy center doesn't really get activated as easily.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Historically speaking, if you remember shooting, what's it called, where people line people up and they just shoot them.
Firing squads.
Firing squads, yes. A very common psychological trick that was used in firing squads, they even did this in Nazi Germany, is they would have one gun that had either a blank or didn't have a bullet at all. Usually it was a blank, though, because they wanted to have the psychology to feel like it was shot. Right. First of all, the firing squad is set up with numerous people, so no one can feel like any of them are actually to blame explicitly, first of all.
Yeah.
And then with the blank, everyone can have the psychology or the assumption that possibly they're not the one that actually killed that person. You see this in capital punishment. There are certain capital punishment schemes where you have two people that turn these keys before a lethal injection. So there's a natural kind of strategy. It's really, really quite twisted, where people are trying their best not to think that they are the ones that are causing this suffering. And so the empathy really, it's there, but it's systematically overrun. It's systematically overturned by these very sick processes that we use to justify ourselves. I think Nazi Germany is the best example. These guys had families. They were taking orders, and they just kind of believed in this blind association for the greater good. And I think even you go to the Bush administration and all the atrocities that came out of that, I really believe deep down they believe what they're doing is actually good on some sick level, and they play these sort of psychological games that I've just described in their process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the Occupy Wall Street protests that are going on right now. You put out a statement in support, but it felt kind of like not a wholehearted support, but definitely some support. So what's your take on those?
Well, actually, next week I'm going to have on my radio show the guys from Occupy Liberty Plaza and the guys from Occupy Wall Street, because I am very much in support. These guys need to make sure, everyone, I say guys generally speaking, everyone needs to make sure they have a plan here. I mean, what do they want? If someone came up to them, and said, okay, guys, we're listening to your plight. We understand. We want to know what you want. And if they don't have something very, very clear to present to whatever authority might ask that question, then what are they really accomplishing other than the outrage? Which is good and educational enough as well. I intend to go down to both locations personally. I intend to get the movement involved. I intend to promote this kind of occupy the world financial type of approach, which is really what needs to happen. So I am excited by this because it's in its infancy. But if it's done strategically and done well and smart and nonviolent, this could be the beginning of a massive social change. And coincidentally, it reminded me of the end of my third film, which I'm not sure if you've seen, where I depict this massive uprising against the financial system, where people are taking all their money out of the banks and dumping them on the front of the Federal Reserve banks across the world, the Reserve banks, central banks across the world. And I was slightly enlightened when I saw this big artistic depiction slowly emerge. And, so if you watch that end section, you'll see exactly what my position is. The financial powers are the problem. They're not the political powers. The political powers are a byproduct of what the financial institution actually is.
Right. And being down at these at the protests, and I plan to be at the one in D.C. that starts October 6th as well. It's been pretty moving. I mean, it's pretty cool to see. It's because it is people. I mean, yes, there's a lot of anger, but there's kind of a lot of joy in that. People have come together and are kind of doing something about this. Like they're not sitting in their homes right now.
Exactly. No, this is it's self-correction. I think the system. I believe in kind of the group mind. It's like there really isn't an individual. We're all sharing information. We're all learning. It's a cultural matrix of data spread across all of us. And I think the system inevitably is self-correcting. And what we're seeing, for better or for worse, it's going to move into something. And hopefully it will be positive. And hopefully, again, people who engage these things will know what to ask for. And that's where the Zeitgeist Movement and all that other stuff comes into play. Because there is a logical train of thought of what would benefit society, but unfortunately there's a lot of baggage there too. People are still believing in this system that are occupying Wall Street. Sometimes some of them feel they need to correct certain attributes of it, not realizing that the whole is essentially flawed by the structure and the inherent psychology. At least that's my view, and I can defend that. And that's what I hope, in my view, can be communicated to a lot of these individuals.
I also, before I let you go, I want to talk to you for a minute about comedy. You were obviously willing to invite me to the Zeitgeist Festival, which was fucking amazing to perform at. And you had like artwork by Banksy upstairs, which I consider some of his work hysterical and moving at the same time.
Absolutely.
And you also seem to be a fan of Bill Hicks and George Carlin. So, what do you think? What do you think is the use of comedy, or where does comedy play in kind of this thought revolution that you're promoting?
Brilliant question. I think some of the greatest influences on my values and my sense of awareness have been the arts. And there's probably no one more influential, at least broadly speaking, than, say, George Carlin and his views. And you can't really talk about George Carlin without talking about Lenny Bruce or Richard Pryor or Bill Hicks. These guys really, they enable a thought exercise through entertainment, which is what you do as well. And if there's such a thing as a philosopher anymore, and I don't mean like that kind of banal,
Right.
boring philosophical, which can often seem very arrogant philosophy. I think the new philosophers really are the comedians. I think that the power that you have bridging art and communication is phenomenal, and it's underrated, really. I don't think people understand how powerful it is. I mean, I meet people that are familiar with Bill Hicks and George Carlin, and I can listen to their rhetoric and listen to what they do, and I don't think they consciously even understand how influential that communication has become. So in the Zeitgeist Media Festival, I'm in deep promotion of that, and every time we do this festival, comedy will always be a big part of it. And I couldn't emphasize that more. I think it's a beautiful art form, and I think it's slowly starting to spread too. You can't censor the arts in the way you censor, say, a political theorist or things like that. The arts have this secret way
Right.
to kind of sneak in, and that's why the whole media festival, kind of was what it was. So I commend you for your work, because it's very, very important.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, comedy is definitely the vitamins in the applesauce. You gotta trick
Right.
people into listening. They don't even realize they're paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to ask one more question. This is from an email I got when people heard they'd be interviewing you. One was basically you're incredibly well informed on a lot of topics. Someone was wondering like what you read, who you recommend people pick up other than watching and learning from your stuff.
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, I have a whole arsenal of stuff that I've read, both on environmental awareness or economic theory. Trying to think of anything to throw out there.
Right.
I think if people, I gravitate towards the sociological and scientific, and at least in my work with the movement. So there are some.
It'd be funny if you just said Twilight novels and left it at that.
That would be great, wouldn't it? People need to just kind of get out there and start to explore. Carl Sagan is probably the starting point of my social awareness. If there's anybody in my media, because he was the first to get out there and really engage the public through his PBS specials, and of course his books are incredible. And you really can't argue with anything that he has to say. And once you begin to read Sagan, you can begin to look at his sources and bibliography and who he comments about, and you start to kind of branch out. And that's kind of the way that my train of thought has worked. And it led me to many different thinkers, from Buckminster Fuller to, of course, Jacques Fresco to Nikola Tesla. And deep within this sort of kind of technical reality comes a social imperative. And that's, I think, the kind of awakening that needs to happen, is we have to think more technically about what's possible and kind of lose the baggage of all our cultural associations. But not to go on that tangent, if there's any name I would throw out there that people should begin to read, it would be Carl Sagan.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
He did some amazing stuff. I think that's it for me. I know you're a very busy man, so I don't want to keep you forever. Where's the best place for people to watch the movies if they haven't caught them and keep up with everything Zeitgeist?
Well, there's the zeitgeistmovie.com. That's the hub where all the film series is posted, and people can download the DVD torrents and everything else. So zeitgeistmovie.com, and of course the movement is just the zeitgeistmovement.com. And that's where we're doing a big update right now. A whole new site's going to be created. But those are the two main sites. So yeah,
cool.
Check them out.
Thanks a lot, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. Take care.
We got no plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending.